to hand the word to Frank Elderson, and I think we have a keynote speech prepared by him. Let's just see if these hybrid events truly work.
Good morning. It is an honor for me to speak to you today, albeit virtually. The urgency to act on the escalating climate and biodiversity crisis has never been greater. The United Nations Emissions Gap Report recently warned that we are on track for a global temperature rise of 2.3 to 2.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. And moreover, humanity is exceeding seven of the 9 planetary boundaries identified by Professor Johan Roekstrom. Equally alarming are tipping points that are at risk of being breached, such as the dieback of the Amazon rainforest and the collapse of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. To address the climate and nature crises, we need decisive action. First and foremost, policy action is essential with governments in the driving seat. However, achieving a well-managed transition demands collective efforts from across the entire economy. Public and private actors must work together to scale up investment and make production processes and value chains more sustainable. Today, I will focus on how the ongoing climate and nature crises intersect with our core mandates as a central bank and a banking supervisor, maintaining price stability and safeguarding financial stability. And as we carry out our mandates, we cannot ignore the view outside our window. The unfolding climate and nature crises are already profoundly affecting the economy. And to ensure price stability and safeguard financial stability, we must factor in these challenges. Failing to do so would jeopardize our ability to deliver on our responsibilities. Climate change and nature degradation are significant drivers of economic disruption and have become increasingly integral to our daily work. Flooding, for instance, has grown more frequent and more severe. Over the last 30 years, floods have affected 5.5 million people and cost over 170 billion in damages. Recently, in August 2023, flooding in Slovenia wiped out 16% of the country's GDP in just a few days. And similarly, floods in Valencia, Spain, last year resulted in losses of 17 billion euros. And today, 10% of Europe's urban population lives in flood-prone areas. Heat waves provide a stark example of how climate change directly affects the economy. Studies reveal that extreme summer heat waves can immediately reduce regional economic activity by around 1%, with long-term outputs remaining 3% lower, even 4 years after the drought. The extreme weather events that struck Europe this summer resulted in losses estimated at 43 billion euros. The short-term scenarios of the Network for Green the Financial System show that in the next 5 years, extreme weather events could account for a drop in euro area economic output of up to 5%. And such a 5% shock would be comparable in scale to the global financial crisis. As central bankers, we are particularly concerned about how these phenomena contribute to inflationary pressures. Heat waves, for example, tend to drive up food prices. And ECB research estimates that the extreme heat of the summer of 2022 alone increased food prices in the euro area by 0.7 percentage points. And beyond the euro area, the impact of recent extreme weather events has also affected the global market price of vital commodities such as olive oil, cacao, and coffee. Addressing the climate and nature crises requires a dual approach of mitigation and adaptation. And the tools to mitigate climate change exist, and progress has been made since the Paris Agreement, with banks increasingly factoring climate performance into their lending decisions. However, scaling solutions and mobilizing investment remain challenging. Significant investment gaps persist, particularly in renewable energy, with the European Commission estimating that an annual investment of nearly 150 billion euros is needed until 2030 for generation capacity and modernizing grids. Analysis consistently shows that the benefits of a timely transition far outweigh the costs. Completing the banking and capital markets union is therefore essential for Europe, as it could enable efficient financing of sustainable energy, which in turn can lower costs, enhance resilience, and reduce reliance on imported fossil fuels. Alongside mitigation, adaptation is vital. Resilient infrastructure can reduce the impact of extreme weather. And additionally, conducting climate stress tests enables the evaluation of what-if scenarios, fostering economic stability and enhancing preparedness. So where do we stand today, we as an ECB, with integrating climate and nature considerations into price and financial stability? In our 21 Monetary Policy Strategy Review, we recognize the significant impact of climate change on monetary policy. And therefore we incorporated climate considerations into our monetary policy tools. And since February 23, corporate bond purchases have prioritized issuers with stronger climate performance. And as of the second half of 26, our collateral framework will account for climate-related risks to bolster financial resilience. And this year we widened our focus to include nature degradation into our strategy, reflecting the link between the climate crisis, nature health, and price stability. With regards to banking supervision, our mandate is clear: ensuring banks manage material risks effectively, including those stemming from the climate and nature crises. And since 2019, we have taken steps to ensure banks assess and address these risks, underscoring our commitment to financial system stability. And we are not alone in that effort. Together with 148 other central banks and supervisors within the Central Banks and Supervisors Network for Green the Financial System, we have recently issued a statement reaffirming our commitment to supporting a timely transition. Let me conclude. The challenges of climate crisis and the nature degradation are immediate, and they are already reshaping our economies. And this is creating material financial risks. Ignoring or hiding the challenges will not lessen their impact on monetary policy and on banking supervision. And this is why we are staying the course with addressing climate and nature risks in all the aspects of our work. I thank you very much, and I wish you a very good day.
Thank you so much for these remarks, and it's wonderful to see the work and action of the climate of the European Central Bank. We have Frank Elderson here live with us, so I would ask a follow-up question. And as discussed so far, it is clear that large-scale investments in emission reduction at scale are needed to decrease climate risk and economic losses. If the EU Commission and member governments were to approve such funds, would it be enough? And from your perspective, what else do we need to mobilize the necessary investment, especially from private capital?
Well, thank you very much, Morris, for having me here live, and I'm glad that the connection works. A great event, wonderful colleagues here on the panel. So the climate and nature crises are already profoundly impacting the economy, and we need to take this into account when setting our monetary policy and when we supervise our banks. So from our perspective, an orderly transition is essential to ensure both these two stabilities that we are responsible for, price stability on the one hand and financial stability on the other. The financial demands of addressing climate and nature crisis are immense. All of you know that. There are many numbers out there, but just achieving, to give you one example, Europe's climate and energy targets already requires 330 billion euros in annual investments by 2030. So although the financing needs are vast, our economy-wide stress test shows that the economic benefits of a timely transition far outweigh the costs, really far outweigh, especially when considered against the alternative scenarios of doing nothing or doing too little too late. Now, clearly, governments and development banks are best placed to provide public funding for these efforts. However, the scale of the funding, and I think you referred to that earlier, the scale of funding that is required is actually far beyond what governments alone can provide. So to close this investment gap, we must create an environment that is conducive to private funding. And this can be achieved through, if you like, two key avenues. First and foremost, by unleashing private investment through more integrated capital markets. And for Europe, this means a key priority, which will be completing the Savings and Investment Union to accelerate private investments. As more integrated financial markets have the potential to offer a wider range of financial instruments that can actually help close that investment gap. And more integrated financial markets could also facilitate the growth of sustainable debt instruments like green bonds or sustainable bonds. And also the alignment of climate and nature-related disclosure frameworks plays a crucial role as a key enabling factor, if you like, in this story. Now, second, governments can step forward and help de-risking investments and provide convenient business conditions. So fiscal support measures such as tax credits and guarantees can play a role by mitigating the financing costs of firms and by de-risking green investments. Structural reforms are also needed to set the right market-based incentives to accelerate the green transition and to avoid investment shortfalls. And let me stop here because there's many others that want to contribute to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank.